Hello, everybody. It's a Wednesday, not a Tuesday, but we're still here with Archetype, sponsored by Lenovo and AMD, and your host, me, Ashley. Hope it's going well. Um, I still wanted to do it this week, even though I couldn't do it yesterday. Sorry we weren't behind, because I just love the fact that we're so on point with month to month we just get a character. So I want to make sure that we keep that ball rolling. So just to recap, like usual, first week we did a drawing and gathered some reference of some ideas that we could use for a character. And then last week we did a blockout. And so now we're just going to go ahead and continue blocking out this character. And one of the things I like to do is start kind of blocking in my low res that I could start sculpting on and doing high res, especially for stylized, especially for stylized characters, because it's easier to sculpt in a low res to get like those forms reading a lot better than it is to kind of wiggle and wobble in something that's kind of like high res diamond mesh. So for example, to finalize the face, we'll do that. And as you can see, the body's also still super low res. And since this is so stylized, we'll do some hair and stuff, but we're not going to go too crazy. We're going to keep it pretty simple. Because I like the idea of keeping this character pretty angular. So yeah, we're going to get into it. So I'll start by retopping the face here. Bloodmaster, hello. Chase Covered, hello from YouTube and Twitch. Appreciate the watches. Hope it's going well. So yeah, I'll take this character and I might split off the fur. It might not be necessary, so we'll go ahead and just go with that. But to start out, I'm going to go ahead and use the slice curve. I'm going to start slicing in the areas that I want this topology to start going. Just like when we do a ZBrush, we have like a really nice topology to go with it. I find that ZBrush works very nicely with that rather than trying to let it do its own thing. Give it lots of direction and usually it'll help you a lot more. So even with something like this, especially when it goes down to a tube, I'll cut it up a bunch. Just so that way I can hopefully get loops. That's my goal. Just getting loops in all the right places. Probably split this off here. Noble Spartan says, loves the channel, really appreciates Gnomon doing these Twitch streams, and hopefully you can visit the campus. The campus is really cool, actually, for Gnomon. For those of you that don't know, the campus is in Hollywood. It's right on Vine in Santa Monica Boulevard. And it's super cool because it actually used to be the old Television Center building, or Technicolor, which is where they colored Wizard of Oz. So it's got a really cool history along with it. You would go by it and not even know it was a campus, which I think is also super cool. It really gives you kind of this industry studio vibe, which I think is, you know, vibes are important for artists. We want to get into a certain zone or feel a certain way when creating and working and putting our minds to a certain goal, and Gnomon's environment helps do that quite a bit, actually. It's super helpful. Just getting the nose in there. Hi, Addie. Someone's like, just got here. What's she doing? What's going on? What's going on is I'm making a character. This is Archetype. If you haven't just joined into this stream before, ooh, should I open the mouth? Maybe. I can open the mouth real quick. Yeah, so if you haven't joined this stream before, Archetype is a place where we once a month come up with a new character. We usually start with drawings, and then archetype is basically meaning you come up with kind of like a standard character trait. I mean, you don't have to stick to it exactly, but it's just kind of a nice jumping point. So this one is the student, meaning that this character is learning something from someone, which means they're probably young and they probably maybe are a little too cocky or too naive or whatever it might be, right? And so it's kind of like this jumping off point of asking yourself a bunch of what if questions. And then I go through kind of my character pipeline as far as the 3D process goes. And hopefully it's helpful to all of you. That's the goal, at least. So yeah, if you're new to the stream, that's kind of what we're all about, is making cool characters. So I'm going to open up her mouth a little bit here. Whoops, I'm not going to Dynamesh anymore. At least I won't Dynamesh with groups on. So yeah, if you guys ever have any questions about character art or just the pipeline of 3D or character design stuff, that's what I'm here for. I'm here to answer all your questions as we sit here for 2 hours and just kind of hang out and draw and sculpt. And I always encourage the people to sculpt with me or to draw. Ooh, my smooth brush. I don't know why it does that sometimes. But yeah, hopefully this is just a nice place for you to come and hang out. I'm gonna have to re-Dynamesh this. There we go. It's an easy way to open up the mouth, by the way. But yeah, I mean, I like that Gnomon puts this stuff on. I think it's super fun. It's obviously why I chose to be hosting one of them. We have a bunch that happen every single week, so I highly encourage you checking them all out. They're all really great. In each of them, you can learn a lot of different things. I'll say things that my industry experience or my character experience, but listening to Jared talk about something, you'll get a totally different experience, and that's kind of important, you can take what you want out of each of those streams, and whatever method works for you. The way I work is super different from the way somebody else works. Doesn't mean it's right, doesn't mean it's wrong. It's just the way I like to work, right? So having that kind of honestly access to industry people is super cool. I've been in the industry for 8 years now, I think, something like that. So yeah, just having access to industry people, to be able to ask questions is super, super valuable and super helpful for hopefully growing artists. I know it's always scary to reach out to artists or try to get feedback on stuff, but this is a really approachable platform to be able to, access people that you probably wouldn't normally get to have access to. So I think it's super, super awesome. And that's a big part of kind of Gnomon's mentality as well, is when you go to that school, it's really about that networking. And growing with your fellow peers, networking not in the sense of just meeting industry people, but networking with, the people who you're also going to school with and stuff. Addie's asking, I want to be a character artist. I'm planning on going to Gnomon. How much can you do online? If you mean Gnomon Online has tons of courses, but also just online in general. When it comes to learning ZBrush or learning Blender, there are so many tutorials to get you started. And so that's always a really great place to start. I usually recommend to people who you know, if you're familiar with 3D programs or, you know, all those things, that's awesome. Some people aren't, and Blender's you know, a free program that you can do tons of different things in, and you can kind of get a taste for the pipeline. You can model in it, you can sculpt in it, you can texture in it. My curves on, of course it is. You know, you can animate and rig. And so all those jobs are separate jobs in the industry. You know, I'm a character artist, but I don't rig the characters. That's somebody else's job at my studio. Sometimes it's the same person. Most of the time it's not. So, you know, knowing what you like to do, and being able to experiment first before, you know, paying a bunch of money to go to classes and go to a school is super valuable to you as an artist. You know, you can figure out what you like and what you don't like. And I highly recommend doing that stuff. You know, there's tons of resources online, such as me talking right now, where you can learn a bunch of cool stuff. You know, this isn't a class, but it does help. Big Bubbles is asking, is there a lot of Cinema 4D content on the Gnomon online site? To my knowledge, no. I learned Cinema 4D when I was there, but Cinema 4D is very particular to more stuff along the lines of motion graphics. I do know people do really crazy cool stuff in it. I don't know Cinema 4D that well, but if you want to, again, you can go to the Gnomon site. I'm sure Backstage Helper can post that if you guys are really interested in looking into the online courses. But the Gnomon website is pretty easy to find, and you can find all their online courses there. There's tons of really good ones. I teach at the school, so I teach Intro to Digital Sculpting on campus, and I love the on-campus experience personally, but of course if you're not here, then that's very difficult. So some instruction is better than no instruction, and I think it's great that, you know, Gnomon Online makes it very accessible. Just re-cutting out because I didn't open the mouth, but I wanted a mouth, so now we have one. There we go. Cool. And with that, I'll go ahead and remesh the head. So I'll go ahead and say keep groups. I don't like keeping smooth groups on because they'll polish the crap out of your model and it's annoying. Why sometimes things like this really mess up your topology there. I'm being kind of nitpicky, but I want that mask to be good because obviously we're going to be colorizing it and possibly even maybe extruding it away so we get a breakup from skin to fur. So I just want that to be clean when I do a Z-remesh on it. It's getting there. There's a few things that are kind of annoying. I could say same. This is the place where I will be kind of particular about certain things that I'm doing. Because again, we're creating a base mesh, which we're basing everything else that we make for this character off of. So to get it to be very clean, for me personally, is important. In this stage, if I'm obviously, I wouldn't have to deal with this too much if I was retopping it myself, but that's not what we're doing because I don't have the time like that for this kind of streaming stuff. So Bloodmaster's asking, what is the end goal for these projects? So I only work on them every 2 hours on usually Tuesdays, not usually Wednesdays. And so we don't have a lot of time to be able to, you know, work on this stuff. So I try to do a character a week, and the goal is to basically kind of just get out a 3D character, almost concept, if you will. It's just a really nice jumping off point. And you can continue later to detail it or do whatever it is that you want to do. But yeah, the goal is usually at the end of it, I'll create a character that's fairly finalized, and then from there I'll pose it. And so I almost treat this like as if I'm making a maquette. There we go. That's what I want. I think that's okay. And then if I want to, I could reproject, but there's not that much to reproject, and I kind of like keeping it super simple. And also I opened the mouse, so that's going to be a hot mess if I do that. But yeah, the goal for these is just to show kind of the character pipeline in general, of how I start out doing making characters in 3D. So that's really where this comes from, and where this stems from, is doing stuff like that. And again, the first week's actually drawing, so really we only spend 3 weeks in ZBrush, and the last week I spend posing. So it's actually really only 2 sessions that we spend sculpting. I'll try to work on it outside of that. If I feel like I'm, maybe possibly running behind a little bit or something like that, or I just don't feel like it's getting as detailed as I want it to. But other than that, it usually will stick. Okay, I think I like that. It's fine for now. I'm being too picky. Because now we can subdivide it, and then what I can do is I can take the face area and we'll push it in a little bit to get kind of that feeling of fur. So I'll just kind of maybe scale it down a little bit and then push it in just a little bit. And now we get a little bit of an overlap that's fairly clean. And while I'm at it, I can pick this color that it was and fill that object, invert it, and color pick the other object. Go. Musaisedo, hello! So go ahead, and I want to be able to sculpt enough into here to get some eyeballs in and whatnot. So we've got that going for us, which is cool. So I'll keep subdividing, and then we'll keep working on this. This is where history recall is actually really helpful. So I opened up the mouth, right? So projecting it would get kind of messy down here, and I don't really want the rest of the stuff to be projected. I just want the eyes, or this area, because I kind of sculpted in this basic face mask that I like from my original. So we can take the history of this, so I can hit control on the history up here, and then I can go back to my new sculpt, and I can go to that history recall brush. It doesn't work in symmetry, which is annoying. Hopefully they'll fix that at some point, but now I can just project, basically just like choosing where I want to project. And it will get funky if you pick like weird angles, so it'll stretch and do weird stuff. So you just have to be very aware of how you're projecting. But I can start bringing back that and I didn't really move the lower or the upper mouth, so the upper lips. So this should stay pretty much how like I wanted it. And there we go. Now I have my eyes back. And now I can just smooth this out in symmetry, and then I can sculpt from here. Saisato's asking what the plan is today. The plan is just keep sculpting. Not much of a crazy plan here today. It's just more of working on getting a more finalized look to everything. We'll see how far we get. There's still a lot to cover. But, you know, when it comes to stylized characters, a lot of the work is going to be spent on that initial block-in stage. It's super important to block that and get that right, because those are where your final forms are going to really come from. You know, there's no wrinkle detailing or anything like that in this type of style. So, you know, landing those shapes right is kind of the most important goal for this. And I'm just pushing back the eyes so I can start putting in some eyeballs in here. And so it's really just about being very delicate with your shapes. Stylized stuff can take just as long as, you know, realistic stuff. It's just in a different way. You're spending your time on very different things. It's annoying that this is being very sharp. I don't want it to be sharp. I want this to curl. And it's just being very finicky because it's bad topology. But that's okay. We'll work with it. This is where for low res, for me personally, I would also usually do like an actual proper retopologization of this. So that way I do get, you know, those nice forms in all the areas that I want. But that's okay. We're not working with that kind of level. There's a point for me on this stream where I always have to tell myself, it's good enough, you gotta keep going, because we just don't have as much time usually. We can do things maybe later. I can spend more time on one piece, but I like to keep it more about the conceptualization of characters and not about the nitty-gritty finalizing and, you know, sitting here and sculpting a million wrinkles or something, or scales on a dragon, because that stuff takes a long time, and to be honest, I'm not sure how exciting that is for people to watch as a stream. Just know that it happens. Is usually scales get sculpted just one at a time. I mean, there's some workarounds, but the best ones will be by hand. So, you know, it just kind of depends on what I feel like is best for the stream here. And like what kind of takeaways you get. My goal, again, with Archetype is about going through characterization and going through, you know, coming up with a character that feels like it's alive, and not just a character sculpt. You know, you want to have a story that goes along with your character. It doesn't have to be a really complicated one to begin with. I think it's just something, you know, to keep in mind as you're sculpting, about like who this character is, what they represent, where do they live, how do they function, you know, if she's a student, what is she learning, how is she learning it, what is she learning. In this case, we figured it was some sort of form of martial arts, because our inspiration is, you know, Shaolin monks for this. But, you know, just asking yourself really basic questions, which I feel like it seems really obvious, but, you know, if you're used to doing 2D art, it's kind of the same as, sometimes you just kind of get stuck doing the technical, so you just get very lost in putting down something on paper, you know, with a pen. And it's that technical side of just like, I'm drawing, right? But it's like, why are you drawing, or what are you drawing? That actually is the more important question to be asking. So yeah, I try to do that as often as possible. I also tend to get technical too, because I'm in a very technical program, and some people ask technical questions, which I'm always more than happy to answer. But yeah, the base idea of these characters comes from that archetype, and then you can expand upon that. And you don't have to just stay within that archetype. It's just really, like I said before, a jumping off point. So I'm going to insert a sphere now. And we'll find it somewhere in our scene. There it is. Someone said I'm going to be bothering you a lot. That's totally fine. I'm here for you for 2 hours. You get me for 2 hours. So bother away. Asking what program I'm using right now. I'm using ZBrush. Not the latest and the greatest version, but I don't really need the latest and the greatest for this. And also my work is not on the latest and the greatest. So yeah, this is ZBrush. This is for high-res sculpting. It's kind of the standard program for the industry. There's other programs that people can use. You know, you can sculpt in Blender. I find it's not as powerful as far as poly count, so you can't get as high res in something like that. But ZBrush tends to be the standard of sculpting, so that is currently what we're using. And I love ZBrush a lot. There's tons of things you can do in it. I tend to do almost all my work in it, actually, which to some people is crazy. It's getting less and less crazy, that idea, but I do tons of hard surface modeling. I mean, you guys saw that we modeled a whole steampunk arm on our chipmunk night how many months ago? Was that 2 months ago, I think? So, yeah, the options are out there. I like to also make the eyes toy plastic, so I'll take this material, make sure it's material select and color select, and I'll fill that object in. And I'll also make sure that, I mean, I can just go back to skin shader and you can see I get a little highlight now, which I like. Yeah, as a character artist, you'll learn plenty of tools. The more advanced we get, the more tools just keep coming out that we have to keep learning, you know. Marvelous designers for clothes, and I use Maya for doing some low retopping or low poly modeling stuff. I use Blender a lot. For personal projects, I use Blender. I've been learning how to animate and rig in Blender, so that's been fun. McBobble says it's hard to do hard surface because it comes from a solid modeler. Yeah, you can still box model or solid model within ZBrush. It's just the Z modeler is a little weird and odd to get used to. I got used to it because I was tired of importing and exporting files all the time from Maya to ZBrush. I just wanted a simpler workflow where everything was in, you know, the same space. I'm also going to kind of cheat and make her eyes big and a little flatter, kind of fit onto that stylized face a bit. So yeah, it is one of those things where it takes some getting used to. And there's tons of really cool hard surface tricks now as well. I mean, especially with like live Boolean systems that are in ZBrush, that's almost invaluable to game pipelines and stuff for creating high-res detailing. I mean, CAD Super is an awesome program because it's more mechanical and technical, right? When I worked at Legacy Effects, all of our mechanical engineers that did the, you know, animatronics use CAD, but they would import their CAD models into ZBrush, or I would do that, and then I would sculpt around their mechanics and mechanisms in order to make something like Grogu's eyeballs, you know, work properly and make sure all the mechanic can properly function and things like that. So you can export them out and bring them in as STLs or FBXs and work with them within ZBrush. because I would use them actually as booleans in ZBrush, so that way I can boolean them out exactly with some clearance to make sure that everything would fit properly, you know, within the animatronic itself. So yeah, ZBrush is super useful, that stuff. It seems very artsy, but if you want to get really mechanical and technical with it, you actually can. It's just a lot of people in the industry don't really require that from the program. So yeah, one of my buddies, shout out to Rick Gallinson, who is a mechanical engineer over at Legacy Effects. He made the original Dilophosaurus from Jurassic Park, and he still has the original drawing in his office, and it's awesome. I helped him and taught him ZBrush, and he taught me a little bit of CAD. And then we had a really cool workflow together at work to be able to kind of like combine those two. So it's a really great opportunity to learn different programs and see like what are their strong suits, and then, you know, fitting that into your workflow. No, I did not say Boston. I said Legacy Effects. They're a practical effects studio out here in LA. Try and get these eyeballs right. Oh yeah, Boston would be that would be kind of cool. They have not expanded into other places, just LA for now. Cool. Another thing that I can do that's handy for eyes is there's this little lacrima that's in the corner of the eye that helps kind of just flesh the eye out and makes it feel like it fits within there. So I can lasso a little area here, and then I can just extract it. And then, of course, it's going to be ginormous at first because thickness, for whatever reason, in ZBrush is weird. So now we got that, and then I can go ahead and inflate it. Kind of move that into the corner. And you can give it a color. You can give it maybe like a bluish color, kind of let it blend in a little lighter. A little darker. It's stylized, so we can play with, you know, what those shapes really are. But it helps make the eye fit a little bit. You're always going to have like weird space depending on how you sculpt the eye, so it's nice to be able to add those little details. That then you can sculpt around. That's getting there. And then I like to go ahead and paint in some eye color. So I like to, for painting in here, I like to grab this square alpha. It just feels more painterly for me, especially for stylized stuff. Not sure how big I want those eyes to be yet. Pretty big. Big eyes. And I give it like a little highlight down below, and then I like to give it kind of like a darker shadow up top. almost like as if the eyelid is interacting with it, but I'm just painting it by hand. Same thing with the eyeball. I'll actually hand paint in like a little shadow. It sells pretty well usually. It's kind of like a little occlusion type. Just kind of helps sell the eyes, and then we can darken these. And I'll give it pupils. And then if it's being a little fun, we can rotate it down a little bit. Or if you draw it, I'm gonna draw it more head on. There we go. That's better. You don't have to add a highlight. I mean, the little plastic gives a nice highlight, but if you wanted to, you could also just paint in little highlights. If that works for you. Either way. Addie's saying they are still a freshman in high school. I really want to go into college knowing some of these programs. What kind of setup would you recommend? What would be simple or something to start out with? There's a lot of tools. I would recommend first probably if you want to start getting into 3D programs, definitely pick up Blender first. It's free. There's tons of tutorials. You know, everybody goes through the Blender Guru's donut tutorial on YouTube, and yeah, so I would start somewhere really simple like that. Another thing to do is probably invest into a tablet. I'm not sculpting with a mouse right now. I am sculpting with a Wacom pen tablet. They vary from very fancy to very simple. The one that I have is a small. I think it's an Intuos Pro Small or something, and it's super tiny. If you guys see it's this big, and it costs like $100. And I use that for work. So I like it because I can port it from here to school when I go to Gnomon to go teach. So yeah, you don't need anything fancy if you can't afford something fancy. That's totally fine. So I would recommend starting somewhere there with some bare minimum tools, and then just look up some really simple programs on YouTube. If you're someone who learns better in the classroom, you know, you could look into taking online courses. Depending on where you are, you could go in person. I also I went to Gnomon straight out of high school. At the time, it was super uncommon. But I found Gnomon when I was a sophomore or junior. I can't remember anymore. But I actually took classes. I took individual courses while in high school to go to Gnomon, and then I had extra classes that I could take because I had credits that I already filled and things like that. So yeah, you could always do something like that, and that works usually pretty well. So there's tons of options out there. You just gotta keep searching for them. But I wouldn't recommend, you know, I think it's good to dabble in it first before throwing down a bunch of money into something. At least that's my recommendation. So definitely take advantage of the fact that there's a lot of free online tutorials and things to get yourself started into learning this stuff first, and then from there you can you can kind of take off. And there's plenty of people who are self-taught for a very long time for that stuff, and that's totally fine. Just kind of depends on how you learn. You know, some people are really bad at watching YouTube videos. When I was younger, I used to fall asleep all the time. So being in the classroom was always really invaluable to me as a student. I work off of a laptop. So, I also have a desktop, but I actually work from a laptop. My laptop's pretty strong. A lot of these programs are pretty intensive depending on how crazy you go. You don't always have to go as, you know, super, super crazy to begin with, but, you know, you want a decent spec on your computer. I wouldn't say, you know, your $200 or $300, you know, iPad or Apple laptop would do probably. If you look up Blender, you can look up Blender requirements or their suggested requirements for running their software, you know, and you can kind of start there. That's a pretty good starting point. Thank you, James. So I'm going to model a little bit of this belt here. And I'm just going to use simple mock modeling along with creasing polygroups, so that way I can do things like insetting, and when I smooth it, looks nice. Just getting some more detail. We can also do something really simple with these collars and shirts here. Thank you, James, giving you the info. I would Google it for you, but I have to continue sculpting. But James has got you. So I think I don't really like this color. I'm not sure what color to go with yet. Oh, another thing is probably need some teeth and a tongue. That's usually pretty easy to add. So duplicate, go down to the lowest polygon, subdivision, delete higher. I'm going to pick the top, and then I'm going to pick the bottom, and I'm going to delete the rest, and then I'm going to grab something like that. Boop. Delete hidden, and then I can just extrude all these. Ta-da! Teeth. Now I can move these around. Move this back and kind of settle these in. Big fan of just reusing what you already have, which is why, again, the setup for, you know, this topology is, for me, the most important stage, especially with stylized stuff. So I'm going to do the same thing for the tongue. You can just get rid of some outer edges here, delete hidden, extrude it up, and then I can just kind of round it out and give it some subdivisions and inflate it a bit and give it, I don't know, like a purple, maybe she's got like a purpley tongue color, right? So this is how I kind of work. Like I'll back and, you know, you saw me work on the belt real quick and then go back to the face as I realize things. That's totally normal. I very rarely will finish one section of anything first. It's kind of a slow build to everything getting finalized. So yeah, it's just kind of like as I see it, I will fix it, or else you can easily forget it, right? So. Kind of bring that smile back up. And then another thing too is that our character has some eyelashes, which will help a lot with defining the eyes. So we can do the same thing here. Is I'll just use my mask to go around the eyes. I mean, you could just paint them on, but I like creating separate geo for it. So we can do something like that and extract it and say cool. And then we can kind of round that out. We could also, it's really easy too later, is technically eyelashes don't work like this, right? Like there's going to be a separation between the two, but if we remember our dynameshing, we can dynamesh this and put groups on, and then I can just split it. I'm going to try to not, let's see if this will work. There we go. There we go. And then I can split the two now, right? So then I can have one that goes kind of more flat here. And then I have this one that can get tossed out a bit more. Keep pulling that. I'm assuming you mean concept arts, but Addie's asking, I want to be a concept artist at one time. And how much 2D art do you need / to use to create 3D art? There's plenty of people that don't know a lot of 2D that do 3D art. I always think that knowing a little bit of 2D will help your 3D a lot, because the fundamentals in design that we're talking about, and the storytelling and like what a character is and who they are, that's the same regardless of what kind of program you use to create them, whether it's a pencil or whether it's a you know, a really complex program like ZBrush that has a bunch of buttons on it, right? It doesn't really matter. This is my, whoops. This does not look symmetrical to me, so I'm throwing off. You delete lower real quick and do a mirror. No, I'm crazy. What part of it is not symmetrical? It's probably the eyeballs. Oh, I have a sneeze. And it won't. It's not going to go away. Oh, yeah, that's what it is. I was like, why? Why is that not? It's like all funky. But anyway, back to the question. Yeah, I personally think it's really important to know 2D if you're interested in getting into 3D. I think it will only help you. It will not hinder you at all in any way to know both. I love drawing. I still love creating and sketching and ideating, which is why, you know, even for this character, we start with a 2D concept, you know. We start with something, and I just think you solve a lot of design issues out the gate when you design in 2D first rather than diving right into 3D. Tons of stuff changes as you go throughout your project, which is fine, and that's kind of the point, is to be able to do both. And the more I do 3D, the better my 2D gets. The more I do 2D, the better my 3D gets. They have kind of like a symbiotic relationship there. Kind of smoothing it. I'm trying to just pinch this. If you have like kind of like a weird open mouth, it doesn't look very good. You want to kind of pinch the sides there. So yeah, I highly recommend always having both skills. I personally, when I look at people's work, like when I look at student work, I can tell if they can draw or they can't. Usually. There's very few people who could fool me. Most of the time I can tell if you come from a drawing background or if you don't come from a drawing background. And that's just the way it is. You know, that's an accident, but I don't hate it. I mean, if we just pinch it, it'll just kind of look like fur. Oh, I'm also going to make new hair now as well, so let's do that. I have a brush that I have for stylized hair. I don't know if you guys have seen me use it or not. I demo it every time at Gnomon, so it kind of all blurs together as to whether or not I have used it on the stream. I'm trying to think of characters that I would have used it for. We did a fox character, but I think I just sculpted all of his fur. Where am I going? Where's character? There we go. I'm organized, guys. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to just turn off the hair now. And pick something that has no subdivisions. And draw out this first curve. I think symmetry is on, which I don't want. So if I draw out this first curve, we get something like that. I also want it to be the same color. There we go. So for our stroke, we'll open this up and we'll make sure that we have a good fall off. So I'll flip this and I'll make it not fall off so much. So now we'll get a taper, right? And then I like to make sure that I have bend, start, and bend in, lock, start, lend, lock in. So that way I can adjust where this hair is. And then I can kind of flip her hair around in different areas and I can make it bigger or smaller. And I want to pick the right. I have a bunch of different kinds of hair cards, so I just want to pick one that makes sense. I think this one will work. Should be able to twist that a little bit. It got shorter. No, that's okay. Move around, you silly hair. We can always rotate it later. But now that I have this, I can split this off. So I can say split mass points. So now I have this. And then another thing that I can do is you can use that history recall in the same way. So if I hit control and I click on my history over here, it'll remember my character's head and not this, because hair doesn't really, it blends with each other, but I want to make sure that I'm always sculpting onto the base. And then I'll make sure that my picker is set to constant for this. So that way it will just always draw it nice and straight. It's just kind of helpful. So now if I draw this out, it should, instead of sticking, so I lied. Instead of constant, I want once. So that way when I go from base to out here, it draws like a straighter line. So now I can kind of manipulate where I want this. And I can always look back on my initial hair reference to see what I was, going for, to kind of stick with it. I could turn it on and I could also move it out and just as like a reference, so that way I can see what I'm doing. And this is super low res, so it's very adjustable later as well. So I'm not super worried about it. But I'll just get some basic hair shapes in there. We have one coming off like that. It's kind of in the back. So right now I'm just trying to follow kind of the silhouette of these things. I can make my brush size a little smaller. Kind of thin that out a little bit. And then we have another one that goes in the back over here. Hair is stylized hair. I actually don't mind sculpting all that much. I think it's kind of fun, but it is one of those things. It's always going to be very tedious. To do it right is to just take your time and you know, place these things one at a time and zen out and just kind of zone in on proper hair placement and things. I'm going to use the liquid so I can move this. Whoops. Oh, it's not listening to me. That's working a little bit. It's kind of freaking out when I'm going over something. I wonder if it'll work here. Nope. I wonder if it doesn't like it with 1C on. Look at that hair. Woo! Why is it doing that? ZBrush can be very annoying with certain things. Okay, I'll just bring it up that way. You can kind of adjust hair size. It seemed to be wanting to be real weird with the tip of it, but that's fine. Because I just wanted to make it a little shorter. Place hair there. And then I'll draw out, you know, maybe one more over here. Maybe I'll change. Again, you can change the size functions every time. This modifier basically is changing thick to thin, how thick to thin it's getting. So if I lower this a lot, it'll go, you know, thick to thin to kind of thick and then back to thin, right? So you can kind of play with how those curves are working with each other from start to end. Cool. So once you got something like kind of basic like this, you can just go in with your little move topological and start moving this stuff around. I also usually will inflate the bottom so the bottom gets a little bigger. And if I smooth this out, you can see it looks pretty good. I'll also go ahead and throw in auto groups on this, and I'm gonna rotate this guy so it's bothering me. Snap that. Bring that back. Rotate it. Move it around. Because I want the flats to be, you know, on the bottom. It makes the most sense to me for her hair. So now I can go ahead and I had a more pointed look before. I'm gonna go ahead and subdivide it once because it's very low. So even something like this will just help kind of ease out and make it easier to select and move these things. And you can always isolate, you know, certain areas. I'm gonna make this smaller, and then I can bring this up, bring this to like a nice point. Go ahead and hide my other hair. I can give her hair that kind of goes to the side a bit, so I can rotate it and I can kind of curve the whole thing around if I want. And then the other beauty too is if I want more hair, what I like is just selecting and then hitting Control and moving this down. And now I have more hair. So you don't have to place all of them by hand for certain things. It's easier just to take what you already have and then continue to duplicate. And now I can kind of create like another extra little level of detail for this. I can grab this and move this out, right? Extrude this. I can make it maybe smaller in the back. Right? Super easy to start kind of taking what you already have and kind of working around that. Let me go ahead and inflate the bottom here. And then once you start subdividing this too, and you start like sculpting on top of them to merge them together, they'll blend pretty seamlessly. And it's super easy. So silhouette wise, I want to make sure that this looks fairly clean. So whoops, where'd you go? Maybe all this can kind of travel up together. Kind of simplify that form from this angle. So yeah, stylized hair is just one of those things that you sit and you just kind of, you work on it and you noodle away. But once you get the end result, it's really fun. I always liked the end result of sculpting hair. If you guys follow me on Instagram, you'll see that I think I have a post of the hyena that I did for a demo for my Gnomon students, and that was all hand-placed hair that I'm just the same exact style that I'm doing right now. So there you go. Cool. Right. I'm gonna keep going. We're going to go ahead and add some thickness, and I want to add a bit more. I wish this would get a little lower resolution, actually. Let's see if we can. That's a little better, because I want to bring this this edge in more, because I want this to be my border for that blue. So I have a kind of like a blue border around. Her outfit that I kind of want to keep, and I want to make it even as possible, so I can go in and I'm showing you the nitty gritty of going in here and actually trying to just make sure this stuff. Oh, there we go. Let's stitch these together. No, stitch. So we're just gonna stitch those together, and I'm gonna move this out. There we go. So yeah, we can just kind of slide that back in. You can also like isolate this area, and now when I slide, it won't affect the stuff that you already fixed. So now I can kind of group fix this and then just make the adjustments right here. And I can do the same to here. Try to select this area, slide those out. It doesn't have to be perfect, and for this I'm probably being a little too nitpicky. I always say, I'm like, don't worry about it, it's fine, and then like I personally just go in and I'm like, no, it's gotta be even topology and blah. But it's okay. It doesn't have to be. Also, your topology would just look nicer than this when you're trying to do stuff like this. Ooh, that's pretty. Isn't that nice? Look at that. Whew. That's some good stuff. We can just probably mask this area, and then I'll run a polish by features. Keep going. Getting some oddities here. I think that fixed it. It looked like there was some double geometry stuff happening. Yeah, there's definitely some weirdness going on. When or why? Don't know. I'm gonna turn off double here for a second. Smooth that out. Okay, there we go. Now it's a nice little loop. Oh, ZBrush. ZBrush doing ZBrush things. Who would have thought? I tell my students all the time, don't trust ZBrush. ZBrush hates you. But it's okay. It's a love-hate relationship that you'll have with ZBrush. Always and forever, so it's fine. ZBrush just wants to be weird, and we just have to accept that it's going to be weird sometimes. That is why, like, if you are trying to learn this stuff, I think it is super important to learn how to properly low poly model really quickly. Because if you do keep proper topology always in mind, there's a lot less accidents and like weird things that can happen. For the streaming, I tend to rely on a lot of ZBrush's Z-remeshing and all that stuff because it is faster. But you end up with having to do this stuff, which ultimately for the pipeline is not faster. To get a result really quickly is faster, but not in the long run of the pipeline. It's definitely not to just sit here and noodle this stuff all day long. But I'm going to go ahead and extrude this in now. And we can even extrude this out if we wanted to, but I think I'll keep it and then I'll just extrude polygroup all. I'll extrude this orange. Yeah, I'll keep that. I'll keep it fairly low like that. And then when we crease it and we smooth it, now we have something pretty nice. And then if we select this area here, we can fill this with that kind of bluish color that we were doing. So I'll fill object, and we'll go back to our orange. There we go. This is kind of like a last phase thing, is adding an extruding thickness to stuff. Because once you start editing, this thickness and things, it can get, you can lose your thickness really quickly. But one thing that I like to do is I'll slide these edges together. So now I get a thinner outside. And that just helps sell that it's more realistic clothing. But it also gives me the thickness that I have for the inside, so that way I'm not sculpting on a really, really thin surface. I'm just kind of cheating the idea that's thin by just making the edge thin. So that's a nice trick that I like to do personally. So it looks like it's thin, but in reality it's a lot thicker than it looks. So that way it leaves for more sculpting on top of it later if I wanted to. So for example, now that I have this, I can subdivide this. And I can go in here with the standard, and we can just throw on some, waves of wrinkling and stuff that can happen there. And kind of, I can turn off symmetry for this probably too. I'll do that from the very beginning. Let's do that. It'll look more natural if I add some wrinkling that feels a little different. And depending on how you treat this stuff, it'll take on a different form, right? So I'm treating this more like it's kind of very loose fabric that kind of folds at the very end to fold into the clothes, right? But you could treat this as super stiff fabric if you wanted to. But I kind of like the idea that it's a bit more loose. And then I think I've showed this trick before where you go down in web subdivision and pick a outline like that. Go up in subdivisions. And then I can sculpt down to make a seam. There's probably not enough subdivisions for this, but you can easily sculpt basically a little seam line really quickly. The other method for this too, which is actually a pretty cool one, is doing it through the UVs. You can sculpt on the UVs flat, which I was going to do and show for the belt, which I'll do in a second. Oops. What's hidden or masked? There we go. But yeah, I can also just go in here and, you know, add something like that if I wanted to, and then I'd be careful about pinching. In this case, it's not really a big deal. But you know, I don't want stuff like that to happen. And that's where the thinness becomes difficult, and also make sure back face masking is on. Is it masked? Why can't I? That's weird. My brush is being strange. There we go. It disappeared for a second. You can also turn on, you know, turn up the lazy radius if we wanted to create like more intricate seam lines. You know, we can do so. Or maybe just sculptural design patterns. If I look at my reference, I could probably find some cool ideas of trim. I mean, there's a lot of cool like patching, like cool patchwork and stuff, which we can do something like this, or we could also extract the geometry later. But I think for now, I mean, you can definitely just kind of sculpt some seam lines in. But yeah, if you wanted to do, you know, a little seam line along, you know, like right here or something, I'll lower it in topology. So we have that, and then maybe this one, whoops. And that should go all the way around. So if we do something like that, invert it, bring it up one subdivision, mask it, bring it back. Now we have this polyline, right? So if I invert it and hide it, and now I go in with my clay buildup and I push this down. I'm also going to turn on back face masking. You can also just move it down. So you could subtly go in and just move that one basically poly loop down to create like a seam line, and you can smooth it out later. So I'm just sinking it in. It's a really easy trick for turning like a high res into or a low res into a high res pretty quickly. because, you know, I don't need to sit and extrude and sculpt this into a high res for game assets because I'm just baking at the end of the day. So this is a pretty easy way to just get, as long as your topology is good, right? But this wasn't good, but that's okay. We'll just ignore it. And we can bring that back and we'll go as far as we can, and then I can just sculpt the rest. None the wiser. So now we got that, and I can go in here with the standard and just sculpt down. But you can see it's way sharper than doing it with the just the standard brush, which I like a lot. And I forgot to do it up here. Oops. Before I fix that seam. Let's push this down. I hope maybe these types of workflows will get maybe some mystery of the pipeline out of the way. You know, it's one of those things where you see probably a lot of finished work and you're just like, how? Why? What are they doing? You know? And usually the answer is like something really simple, which I think, you know, for maybe beginning artists is difficult. You know, when you see somebody that's sculpted like really awesome scales on like their cool dragon or whatever, and they're like, how? And then the secret is that they just sculpted it by hand. You're like, oh, it's just a lot of work. Is that what you're telling me? And I'm like, that's what I'm telling you. It's just a lot of work. That's really all it is. The difference between something looking really good and something looking bad, usually, if you're a good designer or a good artist, it's just time. You know, it's just taking your time to flesh these things out. We'll sharpen some of these folds. I don't know what that is. Must have accidentally masked something. Oh well. But yeah, you can kind of sharpen these a little bit with a bigger damn standard brush and kind of like get in there. Probably a little too wavy, but oh well. I can pull this down a little more and make it feel more crumpled. You can also, from here, right, if we have something like this, and you can see this crumpling, if I go from my low res and do like a slight polish by features, and then bring back my high res slowly, you can kind of technically just smooth it out a little bit, more and more, ever so slightly. It'll get flatter and flatter. So that's also a trick. Is like smooth some stuff out on your lowest res, and it'll kind of slowly transfer to the high res without messing up too many details. I'm debating whether honestly, if I like the shirt or not. I kind of don't. But not really sure. I initially liked the idea of like a big collar, but I don't know, debating. I think if we detail it and stuff, I think it'll be fine. Or maybe we can just, we can kind of split this more. I think it just feels so closed off. It doesn't feel like it goes with the rest of the outfit. So let's go ahead and delete. All that. And then we can do if you get weird geometry like that happening, which you don't want, if you don't want that shape, obviously this is problematic. Really easy fix is you can do an inset. And now when I smooth it, it doesn't matter. Inset will fix all your bad topology choices, and it's great. It's a pretty useful tool. But now I can also, this was feeling just like too tight, you know? And now I do it very well. Now we've got that. That's feeling better. And then maybe we can do like some easy stitching or something that goes across later, just to give it more detail. And we can do a little polish by features and get that cleaned up. I'm liking that a little more. Yeah, I don't know. It just felt like she was wearing like a sweater. It just didn't feel like it fit. And this is something too now where we can, we'll also give this thickness. And I'm going to give this a decent amount of thickness because I'm going to use the fabric simulator for cloth. Extrude, polygroup all. So I'll put, oops, all polygons, not polygroup all. So I will thicken this a lot, right? So I have like a really thick inside. And then again, just to make sure it doesn't look so thick, is I can just take this one edge and do an edge slide and slide that back. So now it looks like it's a normal thickness, but it's not. We're just cheating it. We can do the same thing here on this, on the cuff as well. Give that a little bit more of a normal thickness. And then I think maybe the cuff could end at a something that feels like it's a bit more, almost kind of like maybe what I'm wearing, where it's got this kind of like tighter sleeve, right? So this would probably be easier to do without giving it thickness, but it's fine. We can mask this area. I'm going to snap it to its center and find that. And then I can, I'm just straightening the edge along this line here. And then I can make it whiter. I can do the same for this little area. Hopefully I grabbed the whole thing. I didn't. How obnoxious. Let's do this. Let's edge slide this all the way down. Edge slide this all the way down. Bring this back up. And then we can scale this inward. That's a little easier. Then we'll just do something like that. And then I can polygroup that so I can mask it later. So it becomes like a cuff basically. And then when we do the simulation, I can mask it and then make sure that the fabric kind of folds over it. So I'll show you what I mean by that. Go to dynamics. Boop. For this, you don't want anything else turned on except the body. So I'm gonna have this on and I'm gonna have her body on because that's the only thing that I want it to kind of interact with. And you can just make sure that this stuff is not, you want to make sure it's kind of on the outside. And then what we can do is also, you can mask the inside so that way it doesn't interact with anything. I'm going to give it some subdivisions first, and I'm just going to use crease because I can always smooth it, but you can't always harden it later. So that's where, so I'm going to give it some multiple subdivisions to work with. And then I can, with the fabrics, you don't need gravity turned on, but it turned on doesn't do anything because you're not running a simulation. All I'm going to do is calculate a collision volume. Usually 1 is too high for this in plate, and I'll just say recalculate. Doesn't look like anything happened. but I'm going to mask the inside. So I'm going to mask everything that I don't want interacting with the simulation. So that's all of the cuffs along with the inside, right? So I can mask that, and I can bring this back. I also maybe don't want this interacting, right? I want the cuff to stay nice and sharp. So now that I have something like that, I can go to my dynamic brushes, these cloth ones. I like to use cloth nudge, and then I can start. Ooh, this says the density is higher than the max points, so I can just lower that. There we go. Firmness is going to be how tight, or whether it's silk or whether it's something, more like canvasy. So I like to start with something, especially for Stylized, at a really hard firmness level, and then there we go. Maybe to start, I don't need that high res of geometry. But you can see you get something pretty quick if I kind of just start moving and nudging this stuff around. Firmness 5 might be too much, and then maybe we'll go to 4. So this is something where you can, it's a slow build to getting some cloth in there. It really is just kind of like wiggling some stuff to find some. It's really more about happy accidents. I'm going to push this stuff up to make it feel like it's getting pinched by the armpit. So now we're getting something that feels kind of more cloth-like, and I'll just keep lowering the firmness as I want to keep getting slightly more intricate detail into the sculpt. I'm also keeping in mind with this, I'm not trying to get wrinkles everywhere. This is not the goal. The goal is not wrinkles everywhere. The goal is areas of rest versus areas of high contrast or areas of detail, right? So somewhere like in the armpits, I want to try to get some nice folds and some good wrinkling stuff kind of happening in that area. But there wouldn't be any wrinkles like all along here for the most part, right? You want to think about where is the cloth being pulled down into, right? This would be nice and tight. This would be bunching up at the bottom. I'm trying to think about where all that cloth is coming from is really important. How tight is this on your character and things like that. So I'll start slowly pushing this cloth kind of that way. And this is just a cool way to get basically a base. And then you can sculpt on top of this and kind of adjust things from there. But I won't go much farther than something maybe like that. Maybe if you're getting some tightness on the little cuff here, then you can do something like that. And now I can lower the firmness too. I can also add more resolution, right, to get some slight happy accidents. That's what I'm kind of looking for when I'm doing a lot of stuff like this. And then I can smooth out those weird recalcs. So that I'm pretty happy with that result, right? And so then from there, I can use that as a base for sculpting. So then I can bring everything back and I don't have to worry about touching the dynamics anymore. And now I can go in and, define these areas that I found that were really cool. It's very good at making cool, good, nice overlaps, which you really want in, the silhouette should really feel very broken up with like really folded cloth. And sometimes that's really hard to get into a sculpt without like really carving in. So this is just like a nice way to get there as a base. And obviously you can turn off symmetry. You can go in here with like a polish brush for stylized stuff. And I can kind of start making some more planar choices, right? Making sure that this stuff feels more hard-edged and crisp, you know, if you want it to kind of start feeling that way. This music reminds me like I'm in the cantina bar of Star Wars for some reason. So yeah, you can get something like that and get a pretty decent result. And then I can unmask it. I can also, while it's masked, change the color. I think it would be cool. I think the other reason that this sweater was bothering me was that it's just like a boring brown. So let's make it, I don't know, I gotta make it something interesting. Purple, like maybe some sort of purplish color or something. See, this is the perfect moment I can go down into my handy dandy poly paint. There it is. It's hard to read these things. And go to adjust colors. And select that color. And go ahead and run some hue shifts on it and see if we can find a color that... I think if it's blue, the saturation needs to be very high, and maybe it needs to be, or maybe the value needs to be a little lower. It sinks more towards like a tealish color or something. Martinez from YouTube is asking, hello, is there a right scale for work and characters in ZBrush? Sometimes Dynamesh doesn't work the same in different projects. Yeah, the reason it doesn't work the same in different projects is because of that exact thing, is that it's scale-based. So one of the things that I've run into in my work is that, I can delete this now. Also, I'm going to save. So when you're working on characters that are to scale, meaning if you're making a human that's actually 6 feet tall, Dynamesh doesn't work very well because it's very large in comparison to ZBrush and the way ZBrush's scale likes to work. So one of the things that I like to do to kind of work around that stuff is you will scale it down incrementally to something that makes sense. So you'll do something along the lines of, you know, scale it by 100 exactly all the way down, right? A measurement that you can go back to and calculate properly. And then from there, you know, you can work on it at a smaller scale while you're using Dynamesh. And then once you retop and do all the stuff that you're supposed to do, then that's when you can take it and scale it back up to its original scale. I have to do that pretty often because in games, like working in Unreal Engine likes real world scale, but ZBrush doesn't. So a lot of my work, I'll start at an increment that I know I can scale up back to my normal size and go from there. So yeah, there's no, you can try to adjust the resolution of stuff, but it doesn't usually work super well. So yeah, that's how I've kind of combated that stuff. She's got purple eyebrows. It'd actually probably be better to make them slightly more subtle than the outside color. They're hanging off the face quite a bit now. You are welcome, Martinez. Hopefully I'm full of such useful information. That's my goal. That's all I want for you guys. Just to have fun. Hopefully you're sitting and working on your own projects. And if you have a question while you're working, I'm here for you. For 2 hours on a Wednesday. Usually a Tuesday, though. So I'm going to lower the brow. Because I like where the eyebrows sit, and then in my reference, the eyebrows sit right where the skin is. So I'm going to just match my skin to the eyebrow, because I think it's too high up otherwise. And now I can take the mask is so close to the color, it's so funny. Can hide it. I'm just painting out the... This drives me crazy, but I'm just don't think about it. Oh, if you don't want to smooth out your poly paint, when you want to smooth out your model, just make sure that when you hold shift by default, this RGB's on. You can just turn it off. And then now when I smooth it, you can see that my shapes are smoothing, but the poly paint is not. So that's useful. I feel like I lost actually the line that I had that went from there to there. So you can just bring it back. Kind of flatten that side out. I want her face in this to be a little bit flatter. There we go. And I can follow that line through to her whole jaw. I can kind of bring all this back. So that way, now when I go do the hair, I want it to kind of fall off behind into that. So it's a kind of subtle, I just want it to be a subtle feel of hair. I'm trying just something different. I usually do hair kind of the same every time, but I want to see if doing something like that can be kind of cool. So we're keeping your face pretty simple. So I'm gonna try to go in here and fix this. This is driving me nuts. It's just not pretty to look at. Because then I'm wondering if we can mask you know, right where around her face is and make little tiny marks of fur. Just to make it feel like it's got some thickness or something. Try my best also not to do even lines. But just a little bit of something I think is kind of nice. So it just feels like the skin's more inset. And then also, if we wanted to, we could close the mouth at this point if you wanted to. Part of me kind of wants to, but I'll just leave it open for now. There we go. So just trying to keep things, again, pretty simple. And of course, I don't have symmetry on. If you don't have symmetry on and you have subdivisions, this is actually a pretty cool little... I mean, this is one thing that you have to do. So if I try to do a mirror and weld, it'll tell you you can't because you have multiple subdivisions. So what you can do is just, as long as you don't mess with the topology, you should be able to delete lower. So now I don't have subdivisions, do a mirror and weld, and then reconstruct the subdivisions and bring those back. And now I have the correct ones on both sides. Start adding some, whoops, so much shaking. Some poly paint. There we go. It's starting to get there. I think the last thing that I'll do is maybe do some designs on her little belt, because the way I'm going to approach the pants and stuff is very similar to, again, how I approached kind of the top here. But I'll show you a fun little trick that you can do. So in order to do this trick, though, you have to have UVs. So we can go to Z plugin and we can go to our UV master. I always say work on clone, because sometimes when you don't, it'll actually change the scale of ZBrush for some reason. It's very annoying. So we'll do that. And then I'm going to group this as an option. I'm going to save polygroups, symmetry, unwrap, flatten it out. The only part that I'm looking for is the inside and outside of this blue part. And I just want to make sure that the insides, I'm going to go ahead and do an auto group or do an auto group real quick. I just need to be able to select the inside and outside, and I'm going to flatten it because it's easier if they're just, whoops, turn that way. Cool. So now we have hopefully they'll be symmetrical, but it's kind of the goal is to try to make them as symmetrical as possible. Cool, so now we have that. And then we're gonna copy those and we're gonna bring them back to our scene over here and we'll paste them. So now we have UVs and I'm gonna go ahead and subdivide a bunch of times until I can get details. So if I want some cool straight details, to go all the way around this is kind of annoying, right? To rotate this and then to continue to make kind of cool details. So one thing you can actually do is solo it. You can go down to your UV map and you can do this thing called morph UV, and it'll actually go and morph your model is flat into UVs, and now you can sculpt on it from here. So as long as it's symmetrical, it should be doing it in symmetry. So now it's a lot easier. I can turn on this lazy radius, and I can go ahead and start detailing, so I can now add this stuff. My lazy radius is not on. There we go. I have the worst hand ever. It takes me so long to do this stuff because I have a terrible hand. And then maybe we can connect this. I think in the back it'll obviously it connects, so we can just kind of do that instead. And then I'll try to follow this around. Right. And then we can do some cool stuff like, this isn't at the highest resolution you would want it to be, but we can start putting in some details there. And then this is just really easy to go in and create some cool patterns. But I need more subdivisions, so I'm going to go out of morph UV, and you can see I drew on the inside, which is annoying. So one thing to note is, draw on the correct side would help. But it's always good to do a little experiment first, like carve in, let's morph out. And you can see that it also is out instead of in. So now I know this should also be flipped, and now I have the correct side, even though I'm looking at it from the back. It can be really weird, but I'm going to duplicate or add one more subdivision level to this, and then I'll morph it again. The higher you go, obviously, the more subdivisions, the longer it takes. But now I can go in here, and if I want to add some cool I have no idea. Some cool whatevers. I can. And it's just easier to see what you're doing on something like this than trying to draw it, on like a 3D space, right? It's not going to be perfect, but I'm just doing this really quickly before, we have to call it time so you guys can kind of see. So if we have something like that and we then unmorph it, boop, you can see now we have something like that, which is kind of cool, right? So it's really easy now to go in, and it's a good little guide to start with. And then I can subdivide it again, and I can go in here and make, minor adjustments to stuff. That lazy radius is a little too high. But it's a really useful tool. When I use Marvelous Designer, I get, the perfect stitching and everything, or the perfect pattern out of Marvelous, right? And so everything's nice and flat. So to create stitching is super easy because you just flatten it and then you just draw straight lines around your shirt, and that makes it 10 times easier than trying to do this number where you're like, all right, time to do some stitching, and you just sit there and weeble your hand around. So yeah, if you want to add some interesting patterns and stuff, you can do that. Obviously, this got a little funky, so that's why it's good to kind of draw a little roadmap first on here, and then you can use like alphas, and you can do whatever you want in that Morph UV to like stamp on really interesting patterns and stuff. But you kind of have a guideline as to how it's going to line up. So if I draw this line here and have this go around like that, right? So now I know it's there. If I go ahead and use Morph UV again, solo it, now I can see, you know, where it's supposed to be aligned to and stuff, and how that kind of fits. I hope that makes sense. But yeah, that's a really powerful tool that I think people forget about. It's a pretty old tool, but it's super useful for stamping things really flat onto your model to make really detailed stuff. And obviously this is terrible and obvious, but that gets the point across as to like maybe some sort of cool little pattern that she would have on her belt. So yeah, so we kind of covered like the top half. I'm going to continue to wrap up, and then next week we will pose. We didn't get as far as I wanted to today, but I feel like I was a little slow today. My hands are not in the best shape at the moment, but that's okay. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this stream. Again, join me not Wednesday, but Tuesdays. We're back to our normal scheduling next week, and we'll go ahead and pose this character and do all that fun stuff. And we'll go from there. So if you guys want to see that, join in Tuesdays, not Wednesdays, next week, 4 to 6. And I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your night. Again, I'm Ashley. This is Archetype, sponsored by Lenovo and AMD. And I will catch you guys on the next one. I'll see you later.